Part 1. The House of Plantagenet. Over the course of his reign, King Edward III of England fathered 5 sons to adulthood. Each son was given immense wealth and power through marriage, land, and royal titles. They became so strong in their own right that even their father sometimes found it hard to control them. The oldest son, Edward, the Black Prince of Wales and Duke of Cornwall, was brave and famous in war. Edward III's second son, Lionel, the Duke of Clarence, died young in 1368. His only daughter, Philippa, married into the powerful Mortimer family, who owned lands in Wales and Ireland. The third son, John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, became very rich by marrying Blanche of Lancaster, founding the House of Lancaster. Because of his power, many suspected that John of Gaunt wanted the English crown for himself, though these were just suspicions. The fourth son, Edmund of Langley, the Duke of York, founded the House of York and fought in England's wars against France and Scotland. His marriage to Isabella, the sister of John of Gaunt's second wife, tied the two families closely together. The youngest and final brother of the 5 was the clever and ambitious Thomas of Woodstock, the Duke of Gloucester. Edward III lived a long and fruitful life, going on to outlive his heir, the Black Prince, who died in June 1376. Edward III then wrote a charter that dictated that the Black Prince's young son, Richard, was his new heir, and that the crown should then pass only through the male line. On June 21st, 1337, Edward III died, leaving his 10-year-old grandson, Richard II, as King of England. Richard II's rule proved to be tumultuous for England. In 1337, Edward III began the Hundred Years' War against France, which by the time he died had deteriorated into a losing situation for England. In 1381, a new poll tax to fund the war made peasants angry, and they rose in revolt across Kent and Essex. Young King Richard II faced them and promised justice, calming the crowds. This made him believe he ruled by God's will, and that people would always obey him. As Richard grew older, he became proud and trusted a small circle of friends instead of his uncles. People began to fear that Richard planned to shut down Parliament or harm his enemies. When he ignored Parliament's demand to dismiss his friend Michael de la Pole from power, nobles led by his uncle Gloucester rose against him. They called themselves the Lords Appellant, took control of the government, and killed or exiled Richard's allies. In 1389, Richard's uncle John of Gaunt returned from war in Spain, helping him regain power. In 1397, Richard took revenge on his old enemies, exiling or killing several, including Gloucester. The other 2 Lords Appellant, Henry Bolingbroke, a son of Gaunt, and Thomas Mowbray, the Duke of Norfolk, were spared, but later exiled when they got into a fight. When Gaunt died in 1399, Richard seized Bolingbroke's rightful inheritance and went on campaign in Ireland. It was at this moment that Bolingbroke returned to England, only wanting to claim what he was owed. Instead, Richard gave up his crown without a fight. Henry Bolingbroke became King Henry IV, while Richard was locked away and later died in 1400. Richard's heir before his deposition was understood to be Edmund Mortimer, descended from Richard's uncle Lionel. Henry IV came from a younger branch of the royal family through John of Gaunt, who was younger than Lionel, so his claim to the throne was weaker. After Richard's death, Henry IV made sure that Parliament named his oldest son as heir. In 1406, he declared that the English crown would pass only through the male Lancastrian line, just as his grandfather Edward III had wished back in 1376. Still, to strengthen his legitimacy, Henry rewarded his loyal followers with land and money. Parliament disliked this, seeing it as wasteful spending. His reign went on to face constant trouble, especially a large Welsh revolt led by Owen Glyndwr. When Henry IV died in 1413, his son Henry V became king. Henry V was strong, brave, and smart. His crushing victory over the French at Azincourt in 1415 made him a national hero. 5 years later, he forced France to sign the Treaty of Troyes, making him heir to the French throne and husband to Princess Catherine de Valois. But Henry died in 1422, leaving his infant son Henry VI as King of England and France. Henry VI's uncles ruled as regency: Thomas Beaufort, the Duke of Exeter in England, and John, the Duke of Bedford in France. A third uncle, Humphrey, the Duke of Gloucester, also wanted power in England, but was pushed aside by Exeter and his brother. Dowager Queen Catherine lived quietly while raising her son, the young King Henry VI. By her mid-20s, she was rich and independent, but Henry's guardians feared she might marry again, which would give another man power over the king. In 1427, Parliament passed a law saying she could not remarry without the king's approval. Catherine secretly married anyways to Owen Tudor, a noble who came from an old Welsh family. Despite the marriage breaking every rule of rank and politics, it was born from genuine affection. They had several children: Edmund, Jasper, a daughter, and possibly another son. When Catherine died in 1437, Owen lost his protection. He was arrested for marrying her without permission, but was pardoned 2 years later. Meanwhile, England's war against France worsened. In 1429, Joan of Arc led French troops to victory at Orleans, giving them new hope. Soon after, King Charles VII of France was crowned at Reims. Henry VI was crowned in both London and Paris in response, but English power soon collapsed. After Duke John of Bedford died in 1435, English allies defected, and Paris fell soon after. Afterwards, Henry's council declared that he was old enough to rule. Henry proved to be a quiet man who was easy to sway and adverse to making decisions or dealing with war. This allowed powerful nobles like William de la Pole, the Duke of Suffolk, to take control. In 1444, Suffolk negotiated the Treaty of Tours. Henry married Margaret of Anjou, but secretly gave up the region of Maine to France. When this was found out, England's nobles grew angry. War returned in 1449, when French forces invaded Normandy. They beat the English at Formigny in 1450 with the help of cannons. England lost its land in Normandy, and the crown went broke. Parliament accused the Duke of Suffolk of the defeat and corruption. Henry spared his life, but sent him into exile. On his way, angry sailors caught and killed him at sea. The loss of Normandy and Suffolk's death shocked the country. People in Kent feared punishment, so they armed themselves under a leader named Jack Cade. His followers demanded justice, fair taxes, and honest rule. They marched on London, took the city, and killed corrupt officials before being crushed. After Kay's rebellion, many saw Richard, the Duke of York, as England's best hope. York believed his duty and bloodline gave him the right to fix the chaos. But he faced Edmund Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset, his arch-nemesis at court. When York gathered an army to remove Somerset from power, Henry tricked York into surrendering and forced him to swear loyalty. The Tudor brothers, Edmund and Jasper, were made earls and recognized as Henry's half-brothers, while Queen Margaret finally became pregnant with an heir. In 1453, disaster struck again. The French defeated the English at Castillon, ending the 100-Year War and all English rule in France except for in Calais. The news of the defeat broke Henry's mind. He fell into a catatonic state where he could not move, speak, or recognize anyone, leaving the kingdom leaderless at a pivotal time. The birth of Prince Edward in October forced the nobles to act. At a meeting, York accused Somerset of treason for losing France and arrested him. Afterwards, York became Lord Protector of the realm, tasked with defending and running England on behalf of the king. But on Christmas Day, 1454, Henry suddenly recovered, and York was pushed out of power. Somerset was freed and cleared of his charges. York began to raise an army. Part 2. York's Rebellion. In April 1455, Henry called a council in Leicester, deep in Lancastrian territory. The Duke of York thought it was a trap to arrest him and gathered about 3,000 soldiers. Henry's men, led by his rival, the Duke of Somerset, marched to meet him. On May 22, 1455, they fought at St. Albans, north of London. The battle was short but violent. York's smaller, well-prepared army attacked first, breaking through the king's lines in the narrow streets. Several Lancastrian nobles, including Somerset, were killed, while Henry was hit by an arrow and captured. York knelt before him to swear loyalty, saying he was fighting traitors, not the king himself. Henry forgave him, but after the defeat, York and his allies, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, and his father, Richard Neville, the Earl of Salisbury, took control of the government. Henry's mind broke again, and York became Lord Protector of England a second time. He called a new parliament to calm the country and prove his loyalty. In July, Parliament pardoned York's followers. York cut royal spending and won public support by honouring the late Duke Humphrey of Gloucester as a loyal Englishman. When Parliament met again in November, York asked to stay on as Lord Protector since Henry was still unwell. His allies backed him, and Parliament agreed to keep him. Meanwhile, fighting broke out in Devon, in southwest England, between two powerful families, the Courtenays and the Bonvilles. Thomas Courtenay, the Earl of Devon, led a mob that killed a lawyer working for the Bonvilles. His men then took over the town of Exeter and attacked Powderham Castle. The violence ended only when York marched west in December. At the same time, York worked to secure Calais, England's last stronghold in France. Calais was expensive to keep, but vital for trade and defense. York's ally, Warwick, took control in 1456, after convincing a guild of merchants to lend £25,000 sterling to pay for soldiers. That same year, Henry suddenly recovered from his illness and took back the throne. York, who had ruled as protector during Henry's absence, gave up power peacefully. Henry allowed him to stay on the royal council and confirmed his governorship in Ireland. Warwick stayed in charge of Calais, keeping him safely out of English politics. Meanwhile, England's northern neighbour Scotland caused new trouble. King James II of Scotland sent troops with powerful new cannons into northern England to seize border forts the English had taken from them. York led an army north, but the Scots withdrew before a battle could happen. In 1460, James attacked Roxburgh Castle near the Anglo-Scottish border, but one of his own cannons exploded during the siege, killing him. His wife, Mary of Guelders, finished the siege. Back in England, Queen Margaret grew stronger and fiercely protected her son, Prince Edward. She feared that York would usurp her son's right to the throne. She also disliked him for using force against her husband and for cutting her income while acting as protector. When Henry suffered another episode, Margaret moved the royal court to the Midlands and Coventry, gathered loyal nobles, and began ruling in her husband's name. Margaret and York hated each other. She blamed him for killing her friend Somerset at St. Albans, while he saw her as proud and unfit to rule. By 1457, both sides were ready for war. But in 1458, the Loveday at St. Paul's Cathedral in London tried to make peace. York, Warwick, and Margaret walked together arm in arm, but everyone came armed, showing that there was no actual trust. Meanwhile, Warwick's unpaid soldiers in Calais attacked foreign ships sailing by. English traders liked this, but Margaret called him a criminal. In 1459, Margaret's council accused York and his allies of treason, and fighting broke out once again. In September, Salisbury defeated the Lancastrians at Blore Heath in western England. But when Henry's army reached Ludlow, many of York's men fled as they refused to fight the king himself. Lancastrian troops then looted Ludlow, causing chaos and violence. In 1459, Margaret called a parliament in Coventry. They officially declared York, Warwick, and their allies traitors. Their lands, money, and titles were stripped, and their families lost everything. York escaped to Ireland, where people welcomed him as Henry's true representative. Warwick still held the port of Calais. The king's men under the new Duke of Somerset, Henry Beaufort, tried many times to take it, but failed. When Henry's fleet tried to attack one last time, Warwick struck first, captured their ships at Sandwich, and brought them to Calais. In early 1460, York and Warwick planned to return to England. Warwick landed in Kent, where people disliked Henry's rule. The Yorkists said they wanted to fix the kingdom and remove corrupt advisors. Many believed them and joined their march to London. The city opened its gates. Henry gathered an army, but on July 10, 1460, at the Battle of Northampton, one of his commanders betrayed him and allowed the Yorkists to breach his lines. The royal army fell apart within half an hour, and Henry was captured. In October, York himself claimed the throne as his right by descent from Edward III's second son, Lionel. He entered Parliament, placed his hand on the royal throne, and waited for applause, but none came. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Henry would remain king, but York and his heirs would inherit the crown after him. Margaret refused to accept this and gathered an army in the north. Thinking the enemy was smaller, York met the enemy near Wakefield on December 30th. It was a trap. The Lancastrians surrounded his army and killed him, his young son Rutland, and Salisbury. Their heads were impaled on spikes above the city of York's gate, with a paper crown placed on the Duke of York's head. Part 3. A Game of Thrones. The Lancastrians were stronger than ever. After the Battle of Wakefield, the Duke of York was dead, and Queen Margaret continued to lead a large army of northern men and foreign soldiers marching south, taking what they wanted from every town they came across. But York's cause did not die with him. His 18-year-old son Edward, the new Duke of York, raised his own army at Ludlow to face a nearby Lancastrian force moving through the Midlands. On February 2nd, 1461, both sides met at a murderous cross. That morning, 3 bright suns appeared in the sky, a rare light effect called a sundial or a perihelion, caused by ice in the air. Many soldiers feared it meant bad luck, but Edward told them it meant that the Holy Trinity and God was with them. With new courage, the Yorkist archers fired first, and Edward's troops attacked from the flank, driving many Lancastrians into the River Lug. About 4,000 Lancastrians died, including Owen Tudor, though his son Jasper escaped. Edward's victory was brief. Warwick, his ally, marched north to block Margaret's army near London. On February 17th, at St. Albans, the Lancastrians under Henry Beaufort of Somerset surprised them with a flanking attack. The Yorkists broke and fled after fierce fighting, leaving about 1,000 dead. King Henry was found under a tree, laughing at the chaos and singing amid the ruin. When Margaret tried to enter London, the people refused to let her in. They feared her rowdy northern soldiers would loot and burn the city. Instead of Margaret, Warwick and Edward entered London in late February. Crowds gathered as Warwick's brother, Bishop George Neville, asked them whether they wanted Henry or Edward as king. The people shouted for Edward, and on March 4th, 1461, he was declared King Edward IV of England. But Edward still had to defeat the Lancastrian army in the north. He sent letters across the kingdom, asking people to support him and offering forgiveness to those who had fought against him. London's merchants gave him money to raise a new army. On Palm Sunday, March 29th, both sides met near Towton in northern England during a snowstorm. Edward's men had the wind behind them, and their arrows flung fast and struck hard. The battle raged all day and ended in a terrible slaughter. Around 28,000 were killed or injured, the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. Edward's victory broke Lancastrian power in the north. Henry, Margaret, and their son fled to Scotland. In return for his help in securing northern England, Edward gave Warwick vast lands and offices, making him the richest noble in England. Edward entered the city of York in triumph, replaced the heads of his slain father and brother with those of his enemies, and was officially crowned king in June. By 1464, seemed firmly in control. But then he shocked everyone by secretly marrying Elizabeth Woodville, a widow of a minor noble who had once fought against Edward's side. Warwick was planning to marry Edward to a French princess, but now felt betrayed. Regardless, Edward stayed loyal to Elizabeth. The Woodvilles soon married into rich and powerful families, among Edward's older allies. Warwick wanted England to be friendly with England's new king, Louis XI. But Edward preferred an alliance with Duke Philip of Burgundy, a powerful vassal of the French king. While Warwick visited France, Edward hosted Philip's illegitimate son in England with grand celebrations. The Woodvilles gained more power, and Warwick's influence faded. In 1467, Duke Philip died, and Edward's sister Margaret married his successor, Charles, strengthening England's ties with Burgundy. Warwick grew furious when Queen Elizabeth's brother married his much older aunt, a match mocked across the kingdom. Edward also refused to let Warwick's daughter marry his brother, George, the Duke of Clarence. By 1468, Warwick felt insulted and left the royal court. Clarence was only 18, rich, spoiled, and full of ambition. He fell under Warwick's influence and married his daughter Isabel Neville in secret in July 1469, going against Edward's wishes. At the same time, uprisings began in Yorkshire, led by a man called Robin of Redesdale. These revolts, likely stirred up by Warwick and his allies, soon turned into an open revolt against the king. Edward marched north to stop the rebels, but Warwick and Clarence joined them. Their armies met Edward's at the Battle of Edgecote in July. The royal army lost badly, and thousands died. Edward was captured and held at Warwick Castle. But England exploded into infighting, and when Northern Lords raised the old King Henry's banner, Warwick had no choice but to release Edward in October 1469. In early 1470, a new revolt began in Lincolnshire. Edward put it down at Losecoat Field, and Warwick and Clarence fled to France. There, Warwick made peace with his old enemy, Margaret. Her son, Prince Edward, was agreed to marry Warwick's daughter, Anne Neville, and together they would restore Henry to the throne. They invaded England in September 1470, landing in Devon. Edward escaped to Flanders, while Henry briefly returned to the throne. The weak old king inspired little confidence, and as a result, in spring 1471, Edward came back to England and captured Henry. On Easter Sunday, Edward met Warwick's army at Barnet in thick fog. Mist and confusion caused Warwick's men to fire on their own troops, and by morning, Warwick lay dead. Soon after, Margaret landed in the south with her son and allies. Edward marched to meet him at Tewkesbury, near the Welsh border. On May 4th, Edward's forces struck hard, his brother Gloucester leading the front. The Duke of Somerset's charge failed, and Edward's hidden troops attacked from the flank. The Lancastrians broke and fled, and Prince Edward was killed trying to escape. Henry later died imprisoned on May 21st. Part 4. And, like a Sinin, take another Troy. Edward finally ruled England in peace. Warwick and Henry were dead, the Lancastrian army was gone, and the throne was his. But his brother Clarence continued to cause trouble, as he was proud and restless, always arguing and never satisfied. Edward stayed calm and focused on keeping order. He punished only when needed, often with fines instead of death. He even gave land and titles back to former Lancastrians who promised loyalty, showing that mercy could make his rule stronger. Many of Edward's old foes accepted his rule. His most loyal supporter was his younger brother Richard, the Duke of Gloucester. Unlike Clarence, Richard stayed loyal and helped govern the north. Edward rewarded him with large estates once owned by Warwick and the Nevilles. Richard also married Anne Neville, Warwick's daughter. This angered Clarence, and the two brothers fought over her inheritance. Edward settled it by dividing the lands, even breaking some legal customs to keep the peace. Once England was calm, Edward looked abroad. He planned to invade France to win back Old Glory, and allied with the Dukes of Brittany and Burgundy to do so. Parliament gave him money, and he asked wealthy subjects for more. But when Edward marched into France in 1475, Brittany and Burgundy were suddenly unwilling to help, and Edward chose peace instead of battle. He made the Treaty of Picardy with King Louis VII, gaining a huge payment and yearly pension. Edward returned home rich and respected, without losing a single man. The Treaty of Picardy helped England start trading with France again after the Hundred Years' War. English merchants made a lot of money selling cloth, tin, and wool. Edward earned so much from this trade that he no longer needed taxes from Parliament. With this money, he spent freely on fine clothes, jewelry, and parties, and the royal court glittered with color and gold. But Edward also liked to eat and drink rich foods in excess, when he wasn't busy chasing after new romances. His brother, Clarence, became unstable after his wife Isabel Neville died in 1476. He tried to marry Mary of Burgundy, which would have made him a very powerful heir of rich lands in the Low Countries, but Edward refused. Angry, Clarence plotted again. He had a servant hanged for allegedly poisoning Isabel, and his followers were later accused of using magic to predict Edward's death. Clarence foolishly defended them, which enraged Edward. He was arrested, found guilty of treason, and secretly executed in the Tower of London. Rumor had it he drowned in a barrel of wine. England also faced problems with Scotland. King James III wanted peace, but border raids caused war. Edward sent his brother Richard north in 1481, who captured the border town of Berwick and forced a truce. But afterwards, Edward's health started to fail. The Woodville family gained power, nobles quarreled, and the court split into rival factions. In March 1483, Edward suddenly fell ill and died at Westminster on April 9th, just before his 41st birthday. When Edward died, a problem began over who would rule next. His 12-year-old son became King Edward V, but powerful families soon fought for control. One group was the boy's Woodville relatives. The other followed Edward V's uncle, Richard of Gloucester, who had strong allies like Lord Hastings and the Duke of Buckingham on his side. Richard moved fast. He promised loyalty to his nephew, and was made Lord Protector. But when the young king travelled from Ludlow to London to be crowned, Richard intercepted him and took custody over the boy. The king's mother, Queen Elizabeth, fled to sanctuary with her other son, Prince Richard, the new Duke of York. In June 1483, Richard suddenly accused Hastings of treason and had him killed without trial. He then took Edward and Prince Richard and put them in the Tower of London for safety. Soon after, he claimed that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth was not legal, as he was promised to another woman before marrying Elizabeth, which made his children unable to inherit the throne. Parliament offered Richard the crown, and he became King Richard III on June 26, 1483. After the coronation, people said they saw the two princes playing in the Tower Gardens, but soon they vanished from sight, and then from history. In October 1483, Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham, turned against Richard III and joined Henry Tudor's supporters. The grandson of Owen Tudor and distant descendant from John of Gaunt, Henry Tudor was living in exile in Brittany and had only a weak claim to the throne. But many nobles and landowners saw him as the next best hope against Richard III's harsh rule. Bad weather ruined their plans. Heavy rain flooded rivers and roads. Buckingham's army broke apart, and he was caught and executed. Henry tried to invade by sea, but storms scattered his fleet. He escaped back to Brittany and promised to marry Elizabeth of York, the daughter of the late King Edward, to unite the rival royal families. His failed rebellion made his claim to the throne known, and Richard now saw him as his main enemy. But then, tragedy struck. Richard's only son, Prince Edward, died in 1484, leaving the king heirless. Rumors then spread saying that Richard planned to marry his niece, Elizabeth of York, to block Henry's claim. When Queen Anne Neville died soon after, people speculated even more. By summer 1485, Henry gathered about 4,000 men in France. Poor but determined, he landed in Wales on August 7th, prayed on the shore, and began his march to face Richard in a battle for the crown. Henry Tudor led a small army through the Welsh mountains. He hoped his stepfather, Lord Stanley, and Stanley's brother William would join him. Richard, waiting in Nottinghamshire, believed he could stop Henry easily. But Henry showed no signs of slowing down, as the Stanleys helped him enter Shrewsbury. His army grew as they marched deeper into England through Stafford, Lichfield, and Atherstone. By August 21st, Richard gathered 15,000 men outside Leicester. Wearing his crown, he rode out to crush Henry for good. Henry's smaller army, led by the experienced Earl of Oxford, marched to meet him near Market Bosworth. At dawn on August 22nd, 1485, the Battle of Bosworth Field began. Richard's men fired cannons and arrows down the field, filling the air with smoke and thunder. When he saw Henry's banner, Richard charged at him, hoping to end the battle himself. Then, William Stanley brought 3,000 reinforcements to Henry's side, turning the tide of the battle. Richard refused to flee, and when his helmet fell off, he was struck down and killed, the last English king to die in battle, and the last Plantagenet to hold the throne. Stanley placed the fallen crown on Henry's head, and his soldiers shouted, "God save King Henry." Henry dated his reign from the day before the battle, showing that his victory was, in his view, God's will. He was crowned as King Henry VII in October, and before long, married Elizabeth of York as promised, uniting the red rose of the Lancasters and the white rose of the Yorkists into the new Tudor rose, a symbol of peace after 30 years of civil war. Their children, Arthur, Margaret, Henry, and Mary, gave hope for a new, united England. King Henry VII, the first Tudor King of England, was a serious and careful ruler. After winning the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, he rewarded his supporters. His mother, Margaret Beaufort, became a key advisor and helped him build a strong, stable government. His uncle Jasper Tudor became Duke of Bedford, and his stepfather Lord Stanley became Earl of Derby. Henry trusted men like John Morton, later Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Earl of Oxford, his top general. To secure his crown, Henry imprisoned the young Earl of Warwick, Edward, the son of Clarence, and therefore the strongest, albeit one of the last remaining, Plantagenet claimant. Henry's early years as King of England were troubled by rebellions, as many people still supported the Yorkist cause. In 1487, a boy named Lambert Simnel claimed to be the imprisoned Earl of Warwick, and was crowned in Ireland as King Edward VI. Backed by Dowager Duchess Margaret of Burgundy and the Earl of Lincoln, the rebels invaded England but were crushed by Henry's army at the Battle of Stoke. Lincoln was killed, ending the last major battle of the Wars of the Roses. Later, another impostor appeared, Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be Richard of Shrewsbury, the Duke of York, one of the missing princes in the Tower. Again, Margaret of Burgundy supported him, and even Henry's old ally, William Stanley, joined. Henry discovered the plot and executed the traitors. Warbeck failed to invade England a few more times before being caught and hanged in 1499. That same year, Henry also executed the real Earl of Warwick to remove any remaining threat. Even after these executions, Yorkist hopes lingered through Edmund de la Pole, another Plantagenet claimant. Much like Simnel and Warbeck, Edmund sought help from European rulers, including King Philip of Castile. When a storm forced Philip's ships to land in England, Henry demanded Edmund's return and new trade deals. Edmund was sent back and locked in the Tower of London for life. Henry worked to make England richer and stronger after years of war. He fined nobles heavily and raised rents, which saw vast amounts of wealth and land redirected into the hands of the monarchy, the richest it had been yet since the Norman conquests. Henry died on April 21, 1509, and his son Henry VIII became king. Soon after taking the throne, Henry VIII executed Edmund de la Pole in 1513 before going to war with France. Edmund's brother, Richard de la Pole, kept the Yorkist cause alive abroad. The French king supported him, but in 1525, Richard died fighting for France at the Battle of Pavia in Italy, extinguishing the House of York. When Henry VIII heard the news, he rejoiced. The enemies of England were gone, and the Tudor dynasty was secure at last.